Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling a literal geopolitical earthquake that reshaped the Middle East and the entire global economy in just a matter of months, the 2026 Iran War. It's a massive, incredibly dense topic, stretching from Washington all the way to Tehran and even out into the Pacific Ocean. But don't worry, we're going to rely strictly on the facts and the data to untangle this complex web and see exactly how it rippled across the globe. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the decades of escalating tensions, followed by the February 2026 spark. From there, we'll explore the regional Mosaic War, jump into the blockades and naval warfare, look at the global economic fallout, and finally wrap things up with diplomatic strains and ceasefires.
Section 1. Decades of escalating tensions. Because to really understand 2026, we first have to zoom out into the historical context.
And this brilliantly illustrates the buildup. The modern animosity actually traces all the way back to 1953, with a US and UK-backed coup that deposed Iran's prime minister. Fast forward past the 1979 revolution and decades of proxy conflicts, and we hit a major turning point in 2018 when the US withdrew from the JCPOA nuclear deal, slamming severe, maximum-pressure economic sanctions back on. Tensions finally boiled over in June 2025 with the 12-day war. Sure, a fragile ceasefire was reached, but honestly, the dominoes were already set up to fall right into February 2026.
Moving on to Section 2, the February 2026 spark, the immediate catalyst.
So, the core question historians and analysts immediately ask is, why? What on earth pushed the US and Israel to launch a massive military strike in early 2026? Now, what's really interesting about this is the sharp divide in international viewpoints. We aren't here to take sides, but understanding this intense clash of narratives is absolutely crucial. On one side, the US and Israeli governments stated their rationale included preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, achieving regime change, and responding to violent crackdowns on anti-government protests. On the flip side, a massive chorus of international critics completely rejected those justifications. They argued that the attack was an unjustified war of aggression and a blatant violation of international law. So how did this catalyst actually unfold? On February 28th, the US and Israel launched a massive, coordinated attack, codenamed Operation Epic Fury by the US and Operation Roaring Lion by Israel. This wasn't just a regular tactical military strike, it was a decapitation strike. The operation successfully targeted and assassinated top Iranian officials, most notably Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. An assassination of that sheer magnitude meant there was absolutely no going back. Which brings us to Section 3, the regional Mosaic War, a decentralized conflict. To understand why hostilities instantly flared up everywhere, you have to understand a crucial tactical concept called Mosaic defense. Instead of relying on a traditional centralized army, Iran utilized a vast, decentralized network of regional proxy groups. Think of it less like a single army marching forward, and more like a swarm of bees attacking from all directions at once. It allowed them to combat adversaries simultaneously across multiple fronts. So, the crucial point is figuring out exactly who is allied with whom in this dense, multi-front mess. On one side, you have the US and its state allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait. Facing them is the axis of resistance. This includes Iran and its non-state allies like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Popular Mobilization Forces. The second those initial strikes happened, this entire network literally activated overnight. Let's anchor these abstract geopolitics in some staggering physical data, highlighting the intense military toll on both sides. The US lost or sustained heavy damage to 42 aircraft. On the Iranian side, the destruction was just massive. Over 190 ballistic missile launchers were wiped out, and 155 naval vessels were either destroyed or heavily damaged. The loss of life in the crossfire was devastating. And then there's the financial cost, $1.5 trillion. Just let that number sit for a second. That is the record-setting budget requested by the Pentagon for the next fiscal year, directly because of this war. It marks the largest military spending request in modern U.S. history, a staggering sum that ultimately reshapes domestic economies and taxpayer burdens for decades to come. Next up is Section 4, blockades and naval warfare. The conflict spills into the oceans. The violence quickly hit the maritime theater, specifically targeting one of the world's most vital economic choke points, the Strait of Hormuz. Following their decentralized strategy, Iran blocked the strait and boldly claimed full sovereignty over it. With commercial vessels facing relentless attacks, global trade began to suffocate. In retaliation, the U.S. imposed its own naval blockade on Iran. This devastating dual blockade essentially paralyzed international shipping in the region.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because the international community couldn't just sit by while global shipping lanes were held hostage. They mounted a massive naval response.
This response was highlighted by the RIMPAC 2026 exercises off the coast of Hawaii. RIMPAC is a massive gathering of 34 nations. But what's crucial here is how the U.S. and Australia used the specific exercise. In the shadow of the Middle East crisis, they actively tested advanced AUKUS Pillar 2 technologies. They ran mission scenarios focused entirely on subsea and seabed warfare. Their explicit goal? Figuring out how to protect critical undersea infrastructure from the exact types of maritime threats that were paralyzing the Gulf.
All right, zooming out to Section 5, the global economic fallout, the worldwide shockwaves. Because, as you can probably guess, a dual blockade in the Middle East doesn't just stay in the Middle East. It triggered literally the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. For everyday people, this meant crippling energy shortages and skyrocketing costs to just heat homes or fill gas tanks. We saw real-world fuel crises spark protests in nations as far away as the Philippines and Ireland. Toss in widespread disruptions in natural gas and fertilizers, and the cost of living surged, causing extreme volatility across global financial markets.
Finally, Section 6, diplomatic strains and ceasefires. With the military and economic toll mounting globally, the timeline for peace became an absolute chaotic whiplash. A fragile ceasefire in early April collapsed almost immediately. The Islamabad talks shortly after, they failed. But then, on June 17th, a massive breakthrough. The U.S. and Iranian presidents signed the Islamabad Memorandum, officially lifting those devastating dual blockades. The world finally breathed a sigh of relief, but it was agonizingly short-lived. Just weeks later, on July 8th, the ceasefire completely shattered amid surprise renewed attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, plunging the region right back into chaos. And that is exactly where the source material leaves us, looking at a totally shattered peace agreement and a highly volatile geopolitical landscape in late 2026. This war really shows us how deeply interconnected our world is, how an assassination in the Middle East can lead to fuel protests in Europe and massive naval exercises in the Pacific. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. With the total fracturing of the Islamabad Memorandum and decentralized proxy networks still highly active, what does the future of stability in this region actually look like? It's a terrifying question that global leaders are still struggling to answer today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.